My parents sold the farm I grew up on in Georgia for $2.1 million. My brother, Grant, walked away with a brand new house in Atlanta, polished floors and a view of the skyline. Me? They handed me a cardboard box of rusted tools, a yellowing deed, and a shed falling apart on a forgotten piece of land in Mississippi. My father looked me straight in the eye and said, "Do something with it." That was the moment I realized the truth. My brother was the chosen one, and I was the one left with scraps. I almost set fire to that shed out of spite, ready to watch every board burn. But before the match touched wood, I saw something that froze me. Behind one of the walls was a hidden space, and what I found inside was so dangerous, so unbelievable, I had no choice but to call a federal agent. I grew up on that farm in southern Georgia. To most people it was just acres of dirt and rows of crops, but to me it was the center of my childhood. My earliest memories are of waking up before sunrise to the sound of roosters, rubbing the sleep from my eyes as my father, Calvin, stood by the back door with his coffee mug, barking orders like the farm was a military base. My mother, Lydia, tried to soften those mornings with warm biscuits and honey, but the truth was clear even then. My father didn't believe in comfort, he believed in work. My older brother, Grant, was always the one who seemed to thrive under that kind of pressure. He was taller, broader, the kind of son who carried a bale of hay on each shoulder while I struggled with just one. My father praised him for it. "That's how a Rourke man should look," he'd say, his voice heavy with pride. I remember standing there, sweating, dirt on my face, praying for just one word of recognition. It never came. The farm was where I learned how to mend fences, milk cows, and swing an axe until my hands blistered. It was where I learned how to survive under a man who thought love meant pushing you to your breaking point. My mother tried to bridge the distance between us. She would whisper things like, "Your father sees more in you than he lets on," but I never believed it. My father's silence was louder than any encouragement she offered. By the time I was 28, the farm had become less of a home and more of a shadow I carried. Grant left for Atlanta and made something of himself, at least in my parents' eyes. He wore suits, drove a new truck, and spoke about real estate deals I barely understood. I stayed behind, patching equipment, helping neighbors, taking odd jobs that kept me afloat but never made me shine. To the rest of the family, I was stuck. The day my parents sold the farm was the day my last tie to that life was cut. We gathered around the old kitchen table one final time. The smell of fried chicken lingered, but the mood was stiff, like a funeral without flowers. My father sat at the head of the table, his face unreadable. Grant looked confident, almost smug, leaning back in his chair with his arms crossed. My mother's hands trembled as she poured sweet tea, her eyes darting between me and my father like she wanted to shield me from what was coming. "We've made our decision," my father said, setting his coffee cup down with a thud. "The farm has been sold. $2.1 million. It was time Grant smiled like he had known all along. I stayed quiet, waiting for my piece of the story. Then my father pulled a crisp envelope from his jacket and slid it across the table to my brother. Grant opened it, scanned the paper, and nodded. "What's that?" I asked, my voice sharp. "A deed," my father said. "A house in Atlanta. Modern, spacious. It's yours, Grant. You'll have a fresh start." Grant slapped my shoulder like it was some kind of celebration. "Can you believe this?" I didn't see this coming, but I guess I should have. I forced a smile, but inside I felt the ground shift. Then my father turned to me. His expression hardened. He pulled a small battered cardboard box from the floor and set it in front of me. Inside were old wrenches, rusted screwdrivers, and a folded sheet of paper. "This is yours," he said flatly. I picked up the paper. It was a deed, but not to a house. It was to a shed, a falling-apart structure on a patch of land in Mississippi I had never even seen. "That's it?" I asked, disbelief tightening my throat. My father leaned forward, his eyes steady. "Do something with it." Make something. If you're a man, you'll find a way." Grant chuckled. "A shed? Come on, Dad, that's not even close to fair. It's not about fair," my father snapped. "It's about testing what's inside a man." Grant already proved himself. Ethan has yet to. My mother reached for my hand under the table. Her touch was gentle, but her eyes were wet. "Your father means well," she whispered. I pulled my hand back. The humiliation burned hotter than any sun I'd worked under. That was my inheritance? A box of tools that wouldn't fetch $10 at a yard sale and a deed to a shed? After dinner, Grant pulled me aside. He smirked and said, "Guess Dad never expected much out of you. But hey, maybe you can turn that shed into a doghouse or something." I clenched my fists, wanting to punch him, but I walked away. I couldn't give him the satisfaction. The next morning, I packed my truck with the box and drove toward Mississippi. Every mile felt heavier. The landscape changed from familiar Georgia fields to stretches of empty road. I thought about my childhood, about every time my father praised Grant and ignored me, about every time I had tried and failed to live up to his definition of a man. When I finally pulled up to the shed, it looked worse than I imagined. The roof sagged, one window was shattered, and weeds crawled up the sides like they were trying to swallow it whole. I stepped out of the truck, stared at it, and felt my chest tighten with rage. This was supposed to be my chance. This was what my father thought I deserved? I kicked the door open. Dust clouded the air. The floorboards creaked under my boots. The place smelled like rot and abandonment. I stood there, staring at the warped beams and peeling paint, and the thought hit me hard. I could burn it down, end the insult right here. I pulled a matchbook from my pocket. My hand trembled, not from fear but from the weight of years of disappointment pressing down on me. That was the moment when everything was about to change. I stood in the doorway of that shed with the matchbook in my hand. The idea of burning it felt almost righteous. Flames would erase the insult, wipe away the memory of my father's condescending words, and leave nothing but ashes. Grant would laugh, sure, but at least I wouldn't have to look at the wreck. My father would shake his head, call me weak, but that was nothing new. I flicked the match once, then stopped. The shed groaned around me, as if reminding me it had stood longer than my anger. Dust swirled in the streaks of sunlight, leaking through the holes in the roof. My heart pounded, caught between rage and curiosity. I struck the match again and held it close to the wall. The old wood smelled of mildew and oil. Then, in the silence, I heard something. A faint echo that didn't fit. I tapped the wall with my boot. Hollow. The anger drained, replaced by a sharp pull of curiosity. I leaned down, pressed my ear to the boards, and knocked again. Hollow. The other walls thudded solid, but this one whispered like it was hiding something. I dropped the match to the dirt floor, unlit this time, and reached for one of the rusted crowbars from the box my father had given me. The irony wasn't lost on me. The tools I had nearly cursed became the instruments to uncover the truth. With a grunt, I pried at the boards. They groaned and split, brittle under the force. Each crack sent a shiver up my arms. Finally, one plank snapped free, and behind it I saw not more rotted wood, but a dark, narrow cavity. The air that seeped out smelled metallic, like old coins and damp iron. I widened the gap until I could slide inside. My flashlight cut through the darkness. My breath caught. Stacked against the hidden wall were metal crates, the kind you'd see in military surplus yards. Beside them sat a trunk with brass latches, scarred and dented from age. On top of the trunk lay envelopes, sealed and marked with numbers and letters that looked more like codes than addresses. For a long moment, I just stared. My hands shook as I lifted one envelope. Inside were papers stamped with red ink, confidential. My pulse hammered louder with every word I scanned. Maps, coordinates, references to shipments. I shoved the papers back and yanked open the trunk. Inside was an assortment of objects wrapped in oilcloth. The first bundle contained a handgun, heavy and cold, far too clean, for something hidden in an old shed. Another bundle held files in plastic sleeves labeled with government seals. The final one, wrapped tighter than the rest, felt like a piece of equipment, though I could not identify it in the dim light. I stumbled back, adrenaline surging. This was no forgotten junk. This was deliberate, calculated storage. Someone had hidden these items here, and for decades they had remained untouched. The shed my father dismissed as worthless was a vault. I sat on the floor trying to breathe. My mind raced with questions. Who put this here? Why Mississippi? Why my family's land? My father had given me this shed without explanation. Did he know? Or was this all a coincidence? I thought about calling Grant. For all his arrogance, he was still my brother. Maybe he could make sense of it. I dialed his number. "Ethan," he answered, his voice slick with confidence. "How's the palace?" "It's not a palace." I found something, my voice cracked. Something in the shed. Crates, weapons, files, government files. There was silence, then a low laugh. "If you're joking, that's pathetic. But if you're serious, you'd better shut your mouth and keep it quiet. This could be worth something. Real money. You don't get it, Grant. This isn't some antique chest we can sell at a flea market. This looks dangerous. Dangerous is another word for valuable. If Dad gave it to you, maybe this is your one shot to actually step up. Don't blow it by running to the cops. Handle it like a man." I gritted my teeth, the same old story. To him, manhood meant money, risk, bravado. But I felt the weight of the papers in my hands and knew this was more than I could carry alone. When I hung up, the silence in the shed was deafening. The walls seemed to close in, pressing me toward a decision. Burn it, and the danger disappears. But so does the truth. Hide it, and I live with a secret that could kill me. Tell someone, and I risk becoming a target. I remembered my father's words. Do something with it. For the first time, I wondered if he meant more than rebuilding. Did he know about this? Was it a twisted test to see if I would sell out or stand tall? The night fell heavy over the Mississippi land. I sat outside the shed, staring at the stars, the box of rusted tools beside me. My mind replayed every insult, every doubt, every comparison to Grant. My whole life I had been the weak one, the overlooked son. Now, in front of me, was something that could prove otherwise. But it wasn't just about proving myself anymore, it was about survival. By morning, I made my choice. I would not burn the shed, I would not sell its contents, I would not trust Grant. I would take the one path that felt right, even if it terrified me. I would call someone who understood the weight of this discovery. As I locked the shed and slid the deed into my pocket, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to my father's judgments or my brother's mockery. I was making my own decision. It was the scariest one of my life, and it was only the beginning. By the time the sun rose over the Mississippi fields, I was still awake. The shed loomed behind me, its broken boards glowing faintly in the morning light. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but my mind wouldn't stop racing. I had made my decision. I would not burn the shed or pretend it was worthless. I would not follow my brother's advice and treat the discovery like a payday. This was bigger than me, bigger than any chance at proving myself to my father. It was dangerous, and I needed help. The problem was, who could I trust? Grant had already shown his hand. To him, the crates were dollar signs. My father, he was the one who shoved this burden onto me with his cryptic challenge to do something with it. If he knew what was hidden in those walls, then he had kept it secret for decades, and that didn't make him trustworthy. My mother? She would only worry and try to protect me, and I couldn't drag her into it. That left me with one option: authorities. The idea made me sick to my stomach. Calling federal agents meant stepping into a world I didn't understand, one filled with consequences I couldn't predict. What if I got accused of hiding this stuff? What if I got tied to whoever left it here? I could end up in prison. But what if I ignored it? What if the people who hid it came back? That thought chilled me more than the morning air. I paced the dirt road outside the shed, clenching and unclenching my fists. Every choice carried risk. But one thing became clear. I could not carry this weight alone. I decided to take one more look before making the call. Maybe there was a clue I had missed, something that could help me explain myself when I contacted the authorities. I pulled the boards back again and crawled inside the hidden cavity. My flashlight swept over the crates, the trunk, the envelopes. I forced myself to examine them closely. One envelope was thicker than the rest. I slid out the papers and unfolded them. Inside were lists of shipments, dates, and names, all typed on brittle yellow pages. Stamped across the top in faded ink was the seal of a government agency. The dates stretched back decades, some from before I was even born. Whoever had hidden these files had been working with classified material for a long time. I moved to the trunk again. This time, I opened a smaller box within it. Nestled inside were photographs, black and white, showing men in military uniforms standing beside vehicles loaded with crates just like the ones in front of me. On the back of one photo was scribbled a single word: deliveries. My pulse quickened. This wasn't random junk. These were records, evidence of something illegal. Smuggling, theft, maybe worse. The air inside the shed felt heavier, as though the walls themselves carried secrets I had no business holding. I backed out, set the photos aside, and pulled my phone from my pocket. My hand hovered over the keypad. I knew, once I made this call, there would be no going back. I took a deep breath and dialed. The line connected, and after a series of transfers I was speaking to someone who identified himself as Special Agent Rowan from the Federal Bureau. His voice was calm but sharp, like he was trained to strip the emotion from every conversation. "What exactly did you find?" he asked. I swallowed hard. Crates, files, military stuff. Old, but it looks official. It was hidden in a shed my father left me. There was a pause. "Are you in immediate danger?" "I don't think so. No one else knows except my brother, but I don't trust him." "Do not open anything else," Agent Rowan said firmly. "Do not move the crates. Stay where you are. We'll send a team." The weight of his words pressed down on me. A team. This wasn't small. This wasn't a mistake I could sweep under the rug. I had just stepped into something that reached far beyond my family. I hung up and sat in my truck, staring at the shed. My hands trembled on the steering wheel. 100 thoughts raced through me. Would they believe I had nothing to do with this? Would my father be questioned? Would my family name be dragged through headlines? Hours later, as I waited, I thought about Grant again. I imagined him pacing his perfect new house in Atlanta, sipping whiskey and sneering at the idea that I had called the authorities. He would have seen an opportunity for himself. I had seen a responsibility. That difference between us had never been clearer. Then I thought about my father. His stern face, his constant lectures, his belief that hardship shaped character. Maybe this was what he meant when he said, "Do something with it." Maybe he wanted to see if I would rise above temptation or fall into the same pit of selfishness that consumed so many men before me. I hated him for putting me in that position, but a part of me wondered if he had known exactly what he was doing. The sound of engines pulled me from my thoughts. Black SUVs rolled up the dirt road, their tires kicking up clouds of dust. Men in dark jackets stepped out, their expressions unreadable, their movements precise. Agent Rowan was among them, a tall man with a square jaw and eyes that scanned everything without rest. "Are you Ethan Rourke?" he asked. "Yes," I said, my throat dry. "Show us." I led them to the shed. They moved quickly, professionally, peeling away boards, cataloging items, photographing everything. The hidden wall was exposed fully now, no longer my secret but evidence in a federal investigation. As I stood back, watching strangers dismantle the mystery. A strange mix of emotions churned inside me. Fear, relief, pride, and anger all fought for space. The shed was no longer just mine. It had become part of a story far larger than anything I had ever imagined. In that moment, I realized my decision had changed everything. I wasn't just the overlooked son anymore. I had stepped into a role no one expected of me. I had chosen integrity over greed, courage over silence. The real test, I understood now, was just beginning. The shed that had once been my burden was no longer mine. It was now a crime scene. The federal agents moved through it with an efficiency that both unsettled and reassured me. Every crate was pried open under careful hands. Every envelope was sealed inside evidence bags. I stood outside, leaning against my truck, watching the land I inherited transform into something unrecognizable. Agent Rowan approached, his jaw tight, his expression controlled. "We found items here that are not supposed to exist outside secure facilities," he said. His voice was low but carried the weight of authority. "Do you have any idea how these came to be here?" I shook my head. I swear I didn't know. My father gave me the shed. He never said a word about what was inside. Rowan studied me for a long moment, his eyes sharp as if they could strip away lies. Then he nodded. "We believe you. But this is not small. What you uncovered connects to a smuggling network that has been dormant for decades. These materials were meant to disappear. Someone hid them here, likely assuming the land was quiet and forgotten." My stomach knotted. The idea that criminals had used my family's property for this made me feel sick. I thought of my father again. Had he truly been blind to it all, or had he suspected something? Rowan motioned to one of his men, who carried over a heavy steel case. It was dented, rusted along the edges, but the locks had been cut cleanly by the agents. Inside, cushioned in rotting cloth, lay several strange objects. One was a weapon, sleek and unfamiliar, stamped with foreign markings. Another was a thick folder of documents bearing seals from agencies I recognized from television but never thought I would see in real life. Rowan pulled out one page and held it so I could see. It was a shipping manifest, dated in the 1970s, listing items moved across state lines under false company names. Next to the shipments were notes in neat handwriting, marking drop points and payoffs. The final line chilled me. "Store remainder in Mississippi location until further notice." That shed. My shed. "This is part of a Cold War smuggling operation," Rowan explained. "Weapons, technology, sensitive files. Whoever ran this had connections deep enough to keep it hidden for years. When the network collapsed, the shed became a tomb for what was left." I ran a hand over my face, trying to process it. My father's gift had been no gift at all. It had been a trap filled with ghosts of history, a box of secrets dangerous enough to ruin lives. "What happens now?" I asked quietly. "We remove everything. We'll investigate the origins. This will take months, maybe years, but one thing is clear. If you hadn't called, if you'd tried to sell or keep this, you could have been targeted by people who don't want this history exposed." The weight of his words hit me harder than the summer sun overhead. I had nearly set it all on fire. I had nearly let my anger erase something that could have destroyed me. Instead, my choice had brought it into the light. Grant arrived later that afternoon, his truck rolling up the dirt road in a cloud of dust. He jumped out, his face red with fury. "What the hell did you do, Ethan?" he shouted. "I told you to keep quiet." "Do you have any idea how much this could have been worth?" I stared at him, my anger rising. "It wasn't ours to sell. It was poison, and you wanted me to drink it with you." "Poison?" He laughed bitterly. "No, you're just scared. Always scared. Always running to someone else to handle your problems." Rowan stepped forward, his presence towering over my brother. "Sir, this is a federal investigation. If you interfere, you will be removed." Grant's jaw clenched, but for once he had no comeback. He turned on his heel, muttering curses as he stormed back to his truck. Watching him drive away, I felt a sharp pang of both sadness and clarity. My brother would never understand. He had been handed everything, and he still craved more. As the sun dipped lower, casting the shed in shadows, Rowan placed a hand on my shoulder. "You did the right thing. Most people wouldn't have. You'll get questions, maybe even suspicion, but remember this. Your decision likely saved lives. Sometimes doing the right thing doesn't make you rich or popular. Sometimes it just keeps the world a little safer." His words sank deep. For the first time in my life, someone in authority had acknowledged that my choice mattered, that my actions carried weight. My father's voice echoed in my head, his challenge, his doubt, his constant comparison to Grant. And then I thought of my mother, her quiet belief that I was stronger than anyone knew. That night, as the agents packed up the last of the evidence, I sat on the porch of the old shed. The boards creaked beneath me, but the structure felt lighter now, as if its secrets had been lifted. I stared at the stars over Mississippi, feeling something I hadn't felt in years. I felt seen. The shed stood empty once the agents hauled away the crates, the trunk, and every scrap of evidence that tied the land to a hidden past. Only the bare walls remained, stripped of their secrets. What had started as my father's insult had transformed into the stage for a federal investigation. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of my family's judgment lift, though I knew the fallout had only just begun. That evening, I drove back to Georgia. My truck rattled over the roads I knew by heart, carrying me home to confront the family that had set me on this path. When I stepped through the door, the air was heavy with silence. My mother sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a cold cup of tea. My father leaned against the counter, his face unreadable. "I heard," my father said, his voice low. "Agents called. They wanted to know if I had ever seen anything suspicious on that land." I dropped my keys on the table and looked him in the eye. "Did you know?" His jaw tightened. For a long time, he said nothing. Then he shook his head. "I suspected something was wrong with that property when I acquired it years back. A man offered it for cheap, too cheap. I thought maybe it was worthless farmland, but I never set foot inside the shed. I figured if it was rotten, it could be torn down someday. I never imagined this." The explanation did little to soothe me. He had left me in the dark and tossed me the problem like a bone to a dog. My anger flared. "You gave it to me like it was punishment. Do something with it, you said." "That wasn't a test, Dad. That was a trap." His eyes narrowed, but he didn't argue. My mother spoke instead, her voice trembling. "Ethan, what you did, it was brave. You could have walked away, or worse, you could have followed your brother's advice, but you didn't. You chose the hard road, and I am proud of you." Those words warmed me in a way I didn't expect. My father's silence still cut deep, but my mother's faith filled a void I had carried for years. Grant barged in not long after, slamming the door behind him. His face was red, his eyes full of fury. "You ruined everything. Do you know what kind of opportunity you threw away? We could have been set for life." I stood, meeting his glare. "Set for life with stolen weapons and government files. You would have sold poison to the highest bidder. That's not an opportunity, Grant. That's suicide." He scoffed, shaking his head. "You think you're a hero now? You think Dad's finally going to see you as more than the weak one? You're still nothing." The old me would have crumbled at those words. I would have swallowed my pride and carried the shame like a weight on my shoulders. But not this time. I stepped closer, my voice steady. "I may not have the house or the money, but I have something you don't. I made the right choice. And for once, I can live with myself." Grant sneered, but he had no response. He stormed out, his footsteps echoing down the hall until the door slammed behind him. Silence fell again. My father stared at me for a long moment. Finally, he said, "I can't say I would have done the same, but you did what needed to be done. That takes a kind of strength most men don't have. It wasn't praise, not in the way he had praised Grant all those years, but it was acknowledgement, and for me, it was enough. Days turned into weeks. Federal agents called me in for questioning more than once, but each time they made it clear I was not under suspicion. They wanted details about my father, the sale of the farm, and the history of the land. I told them everything I knew, which wasn't much. Eventually, their tone softened, and one agent even said, "Most people in your position would have been tempted." "You did the smart thing?" That comment stayed with me. My entire life had been about trying to live up to someone else's standard, my father's, my brother's, even my own flawed image of what I thought manhood required. But standing in that shed, staring at weapons and secrets buried for decades, I realized strength isn't about lifting the heaviest load or chasing the biggest prize. It's about doing what's right when every voice around you tells you to do otherwise. The shed still sits on that patch of Mississippi land. Empty, quiet, harmless now. I thought about tearing it down, wiping away the memory of what I found there. But I chose to leave it standing. It reminds me of who I was when I arrived, angry, bitter, desperate for approval, and who I became when I left. One night, my mother called me out to the porch. The stars stretched wide above us, the same sky that had once watched me suffer in silence. She touched my arm and said softly, "You don't need their approval anymore. You've already proved who you are." For the first time, I believed her. Looking back, I thought my inheritance was an insult, a box of broken tools and a deed to a useless shed. But the truth is, it was the greatest gift I could have been given. Inside those rotted walls, I found more than hidden crates and old files. I found the strength to make my own choice, the courage to step out of my brother's shadow, and the resolve to stop waiting for my father's approval. My story isn't about what my parents gave me or what my brother received. It's about what I built from the one thing they didn't expect me to use, my backbone. And for the first time in my life, that was enough. That shed was supposed to be nothing more than an insult. My brother got a mansion. I got a pile of rusted tools and a broken roof. But inside those walls, I found something that forced me to make the hardest choice of my life. I didn't walk away richer, but I walked away stronger. And for me, that was worth more than any check my father could have written. If this story pulled you in, hit that like button so more people can hear it too. Share it with someone who loves a good mystery. Drop a comment below and tell me what you would have done if you were standing in my shoes. And if you want more stories like this, real stories about family, choices, and the unexpected, make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these stories alive.